All right, so today we're diving into a legal document that makes, well, a truly radical claim. I mean, this thing challenges a core pillar of American life. It argues that for a lot of people, paying federal income tax isn't actually a requirement, but a choice. So let's break down exactly how it even tries to build that case.
I mean, that's the big question, right? Is paying federal income tax a choice? The entire argument in this document, it really just boils down to that one provocative idea. It's designed to challenge a fundamental assumption pretty much all of us have about our financial obligations.
So this whole idea comes from a document called a Revocation of Election, which is apparently designed to be filed with the IRS. And its central claim is that paying federal income tax is entirely voluntary. Now, I want to be super clear. Our goal here is not to validate this claim. We're just going to deconstruct its logic, step by step, to see how on earth it reaches that conclusion.
Okay, so the foundation of this entire argument, it all rests on a very specific and, let's say, unique set of definitions for key legal terms. Before we can even get to the conclusion, we have to understand their starting point, because everything else is built on top of it. So the very first move the document makes is a big one. It completely redefines the term United States. It claims that when you see that term in the tax code, it doesn't mean all 50 states like you'd think. Nope. It argues the term legally applies only to the District of Columbia and federal territories. This is the absolute cornerstone of its entire argument. It's basically creating a separate legal zone right inside the country. Okay, next up, the document introduces its own term, one you're not going to find in the tax code, American national. It uses this phrase to define someone who was born or naturalized in one of the 50 states. And in doing so, it draws this really sharp line between them and a U.S. citizen, who, in their view, is someone under that limited D.C. jurisdiction we just talked about. And here's where the argument gets really, really creative. It takes that term it just created, American national, and claims it's the true meaning of an official term from the tax code, non-resident alien individual. You heard that right. Essentially, it's arguing that if you're from one of the 50 states, the law actually sees you as an alien to the federal tax system that's based in D.C. This quote from the document itself shows you exactly how they connect those dots. It's arguing that the official definition of non-resident alien is intentionally vague, basically to hide what it claims is the real meaning, a sovereign individual from one of the 50 states who is separate from the federal government. Okay, so if American nationals are supposedly outside the D.C. tax jurisdiction, then how do they end up paying income tax? Well, let's get into the next part of this, which explains the mechanism the document calls the election. According to this argument, the act of filing a Form 1040, that's not a mandatory duty. It's a voluntary choice. It's what's called a sub silentio, or silent agreement to be treated as a taxpayer. It's like you're quietly opting in to the federal tax system, even if, according to them, you weren't originally supposed to be in it. So if you follow this logic, it means the country is basically split into two groups. On one side, you have lawful taxpayers who are essentially federal employees connected to D.C. And on the other side, you have, well, pretty much everyone else. They claim these people are lawful non-taxpayers by default, completely outside the system, unless they voluntarily choose to enter it. And this leads to maybe the most radical conclusion of all. If paying taxes is just a choice, then what is the money you're sending in? The document argues it's legally a gift or bequest, like a donation. It actually points to a U.S. code about the Treasury accepting gifts as proof that your tax payment isn't an obligation, but just a voluntary contribution. So it follows that if filing a 1040 is a voluntary election to get in, the document then argues there must be a way to get out, to undo it. This next part outlines the specific legal process it proposes for revoking that choice and going back to being a non-taxpayer. And this whole revocation process, it all hinges on a very, let's call it, creative reading of one single statute. The document points to a section of the tax code about treating a non-resident alien as a resident. Now, normally, this law is used by certain non-citizens for joint tax filings, but this document claims it contains a hidden mechanism for anyone to terminate their status as a taxpayer. And here is the step-by-step process it lays out. It's basically a formal legal notice that you send to the IRS. You have to cite that specific statute, declare that you're terminating your election to be taxed, and then reaffirm your status as one of these sovereign American nationals. The final step? Get it notarized and mail it in. Now, according to the document's reading of the code, this is not a temporary change. It's a one-way street. It cites another subsection of that same statute, which says that once an election is terminated, that person is ineligible to make that same election ever again. So, no takebacks. Of course, you can't make a claim this big without some kind of justification. So let's take a look at the legal and historical evidence the document presents to try and support its very unconventional framework. The document really tries to ground its argument in history. It reaches way back to an 1895 Supreme Court case to argue that federal income tax was originally limited. It then cites President Taft's comments on the 16th Amendment to claim it was only ever supposed to apply to the government itself. And finally, it points to a 1972 case as what it calls proof that courts actually acknowledge the existence of lawful non-taxpayers. So, if we weave all those threads together, here's the core proof they're presenting. 1. The 16th Amendment only applies to D.C. 2. The legal term person in the tax code doesn't include a sovereign American national. And 3. Any tax you pay is legally just a gift. See how it all comes together to build this alternate legal reality? And this quote from that economy plumbing case is absolutely central to their conclusion. They interpret these words from the court as a formal acknowledgement that there are two distinct classes of people when it comes to tax law. And of course, they claim American nationals fall squarely into that non-taxpayer category. So what's the end goal of this whole process? Where does this all lead? This final section basically summarizes the status the document claims you can achieve if you follow all its steps. The end game here is actually pretty simple. It's to revert to what the document calls your rightful status. By revoking that prior election, an individual, it argues, can place themselves completely outside the reach and scope of all federal income tax laws. Period. All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the argument we've just walked through. At its heart, it claims that paying taxes is a choice you make by filing a Form 1040, and that a legal off-ramp exists to revoke that choice forever. It's a whole theory built entirely on its own unique definitions, and let's face it, a very selective reading of law and history. So we've just deconstructed an incredibly detailed, and you have to admit, complex, alternative view of the U.S. tax system. Now, putting aside the legal merits for a second, the very existence of an argument like this really makes you think, doesn't it? It just goes to show how a few key definitions, when they're interpreted creatively, can be used to build an entirely different reality from the very same set of laws we all live under.